Pila, mi gente. He llegado a un barrio de Salem, Massachusetts, a documentar la historia de las brujas. Pila, mi gente. He llegado aquí a un museo. Voy a entrar aquí. Aquí hay la historia de las brujas de los siglos XVII, de año 1690. Pilas, mi gente. He llegado aquí. Miren nomás, ahí está. Pila, mi gente. Voy a entrar acá. Pila, mi gente. Nos vemos aquí. Esto se llama Salem, Massachusetts. Un pueblito de las brujas de Salem. Pila, mi gente. Pila, mi gente. Aquí voy, mire. Con las brujitas, mire nomás. Esto es Salem, Massachusetts. Vamos a ver aquí las niñas. Pila, mi gente. He llegado aquí a un barrio de Salem, Massachusetts, a documentar una historia de las brujas que existían en los años 1690, en el siglo XVII. Pila, mi gente. Miren nomás. Voy llegando. Miren. Pila, mi gente.
Laila.
Miren nomás. Aquí está, mira, un filón, mira. Miren nomás los perritos. Ok. Pila, mi gente. He llegado aquí a Salem, Massachusetts, a un barrio de Salem, Massachusetts. Miren nomás. Está el museo de Salem. Y voy a ver si puedo entrar aquí. Pila, mi gente, miren nomás. Este es el museo de las brujas de los tiempos que existían, pues aquí. Y miren. Ok, voy a ver si puedo entrar aquí. Miren nomás. Miren nomás, aquí está. Así tiene que llegar aquí. Pila, mi gente, miren. Está bien chévere. Que pila. Miren nomás. Que voy a ver si puedo. Ok, pila, mi gente, miren. Voy de entrada, pila, mi gente. Vamos a ver qué es lo que hay acá adentro. Esta es la línea, miren nomás. Que viene por ahí. Vamos acá. Vamos a esperar aquí. Vamos a la línea, miren nomás.
A mobile home. Yeah, pretty much.
Sacando
So
medita,
we
miren.
haven't
Vamos a
lucky.
entrar
Everything
allá
how
adentro.
parking it yet, but good. We've been to Boston and I've been able to park it, so I've been able to get it there.
Miren. Miren nomás. Pila, mi gente. Vamos a entrar en orden, todo en orden, pilas. Ok, pila, mi gente. He entrado ya, mira. Está todo oscuro aquí, no sé, no miro nada. Miren nomás.
Go ahead and fill in all the stools for me, folks. Go ahead and down. Thank you, folks. You can fill in these stools here at Lester.
Forever watching, waiting to claim his own. Here is the Putnam House, typical of its day, everything in it plain and practical. People then had little time for play. The men in summer worked at farming or fishing. In winter they mended fences or nets or went hunting in the woodlands for partridge or wild turkey. The women toiled the year round at cooking, washing, scrubbing and sanding the floors, molding tallow candles to light the long winter nights. For young people, especially girls, there was not much amusement. A girl like little Ann Putnam, having done her household duties, would not be encouraged to run and play, to meet boys, to be frivolous. The Puritan God forbade it. Trapped as they were in this somber adult world, it is not surprising that girls of the time became restless and resentful. But the hand of authority was so heavy upon them, they dared not express themselves, except sometimes in attacks of what we call hysteria, wild, destructive emotional outbursts. Anne had more reason than most for being disturbed. Her mother was an embittered woman whose sister had died in childbirth. Mrs. Putnam herself had had 2 children who had died, and lately had started dreaming about her sister. The center of these meetings was old Tituba, a black woman whom Paris had brought back as his servant from Barbados. To amuse the girls, Tituba told them stories or showed them tricks and scraps of magic, some of which had probably come over with her ancestors in the slave ships from Africa. Anne's mother may have thought to use Tituba as her means of communing with the dead, but things shortly took a very different turn. Poor innocent Tituba. Little did she imagine that the tale she told to pass a winter's afternoon would soon be used against her. Nor could she have guessed that the terrible suspicions at first concentrated upon her would spread to involve so many, many others. The very fact that her circle met in the house of a minister, whatever the malady was, dozens of other young girls would soon be catching it. Within a few days, Dr. Griggs would be making the same calls, asking the same futile questions in houses all over Salem village.
Betty, child, what afflicts thee?
Betty, speak, in God's name. Who has done this to thee?
It began to seem to the villagers that they were seeing the devil's work.
Oh, protect her.
The girls
She's
were possessed.
speaking in tongues.
They twitched and spoke in tongues. It was not a case for medicine at all. Said the doctor, the evil hand is upon them. It was for men of the church to discover who was responsible. The girls now began to be questioned night and day, the Reverend Paris himself taking the lead in these inquisitions. The sternest efforts were made to wring from them some. Rebecca could scarcely walk at the time, in no way affected the accusation of witchcraft. The hysterical girls, carried away, began giving what was called spectral evidence. Visions they claimed to have had of the accused. According to Ann Putnam and Abigail Williams, Rebecca's shape, her astral self or soul, had been seen flying about, while in body she lay at home in bed. At first, no one in the town could believe it. But then her few enemies, among them Ann Putnam's mother, declared against her. On March 23rd, 1692, Rebecca Nurse was placed under arrest. The case was very nearly dismissed, but for a last-minute accusation made once again by Mrs. Putnam. On the strength of that, old Rebecca Nurse was finally brought to trial in Salem on June 29th, Chief Justice William Stoughton presiding. Even then, the townsfolk on the jury were not convinced. Mrs. Putnam and the girls who had testified against Rebecca were among the onlookers. A hush falls over the courtroom as Thomas Fisk, foreman of the jury, rises to deliver the verdict.
May it please the court, we find the defendant, Rebecca Nurse, not guilty.
Mr. Fisk, I must ask that you and your fellow jurors reconsider your verdict.
Rebecca was cross-examined again about a remark she had made earlier in the trial. It involved a misunderstanding which, because of her deafness, she had been unable to clarify to the satisfaction of the court. Now, old and exhausted, she was questioned about it once more. General panic. Unlike others, he saw the hounding of witches to be nonsense and said so. When his own servant girl was afflicted, he turned her over his knee and spanked her, temporarily curing her. His outspokenness attracted the attention of the girls. His pregnant wife Elizabeth was soon accused and haled into court as a witch. When he took the stand to defend her, he was denounced by one of the witnesses, Abigail Williams. By spectral evidence, she suddenly discovered that he too was a witch. And the other girls... The girls claimed that her soul was escaping and tormenting them still. So the old woman was loaded down with chains, as if these would somehow trap her wandering spirit. She was charged for her chains, just as she and the other prisoners were charged for the food they ate. Even those who escaped hanging were in some cases bankrupted by their terms in prison. Here is Sarah Daston of Charlestown. Her neighbors denounced her as a witch. She was tried and found not guilty. But she was too poor to pay her court costs and so held. Her relatives were years in collecting the money to free her. And before they did so, she died, innocent and all but forgotten, in this cell. Here are John Proctor and his pregnant wife Elizabeth. John is writing a last letter to the friends who had tried to save him. In defending his wife and their unborn child, he has at least succeeded. Because of her pregnancy, the court will grant her a stay of execution, and she will be released after the witch madness has died down. John is less fortunate. He will hang within the fortnight on August 19th, along with George Burroughs and 3 others as guiltless as himself. And here is Tituba, the old slave, whose charms and tricks and tales told to pass a winter's afternoon were the start of it all. In fear of her insane masters, she has confessed and will eventually go free, never understanding what wrong she has done. Indeed, she did none, nor did any of the others. They were simply struck down by the dementia of their times, the way in ages to come men were to be struck down for holding the wrong political opinions or for being of the wrong race. It is perhaps no accident that the Salem witch persecution began with a woman who was black, and that the devil...
Wilt thou not speak and say yea or nay in thy behalf? What sayest thou? Speak!
More weight! More weight!
So be it then. More weight.
Burroughs, a former minister in Salem Village, had been arrested and brought back from Maine. His execution was presided over by Cotton Mather, who had come from Boston for the occasion. It was thought in those days that a witch could not recite the Lord's Prayer without a mistake. On the gallows, Burroughs gave this final proof of his innocence.
And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Things had gone too far. Cotton Mather speaks.
The devil but speaks through the mouth of his servant. This man is guilty and shall hang. There shall be no reversals of justice in this place. Hangman, you may proceed.
So died George Burroughs, minister of the Lord, and 18 others in 1690.